Good morning everyone and welcome to Block's next Breakfast Club session. Today's session's on the future of desktop in healthcare. Get to the next slide. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Dan Whiston. I'm the Director of Digital Transformation with Block. Joining me today are Craig Pickford, Solution Architect in the Workspace and Cloud area, and also Mike Fox, who's a Principal Consultant. So we've got an hour with you today, three kind of main areas, and then also hopefully some time for questions and answers. So if I can ask if during the presentation, please feel free to pop some questions into the Q&A slot, and hopefully we'll get time to answer those later. In terms of agenda, I'm going to start off today in a couple of minutes' time in terms of giving you a brief context of workspace transformation in the NHS. Obviously from a Block point of view, but very much focused more from a kind of more of an operational and a CIO perspective. Mike will then go into more of the desktop challenge with regards to kind of from a technical point of view and from his experience as a member of the NHS for many years. And then finally, Craig's going to touch upon Block's perception and Block's approach in terms of desktop, what we've put together in terms of propositions and how we believe those can support you guys moving forward in the field to help your users, hopefully. So next slide, Mike. So as I say, to start off with, to give you a kind of a Block view in terms of some of the environmental pieces. Now, there are obviously many things that we could talk about here, and we've put a few down that we feel at the moment are obviously absolutely critical to decisions being made and how you operate in this environment at the moment. The first is COVID, clearly. I know we all hope that it's going to be a very transient piece, but clearly it's gone for a lot longer than we thought. Certainly from a Block perspective, we moved very quickly, very fleet of foot to move to work in a remote setting. And certainly over the last year, we've been supporting many of our customers. Some of those you know might be you on the call today to work, certainly looking at desktop, but other pieces of our technology base to support you guys. We certainly don't see that going away. So in terms of fundamentally COVID having an impact, we can really see that. I think we would say quite positively that working remotely in terms of both from a clinical setting and a non-clinical setting is here to stay. So it's understanding how that can be kind of interweaved into our business as usual as we move forward. Next is NHS long-term plan. Many of you may have read it. I know I've read it 3 or 4 times now, cover to cover. And in seriousness, there's lots of pieces in there that I think are aspirational in terms of how we move forward, and certainly from Block's perspective, how we support organisations in the NHS to do that. I myself had sort of 20 years healthcare, last role as a director of IT and a director of transformation for a large trust. But certainly in the 2 years that I've worked for Block, we've had multiple conversations with organisations, with CIOs and CTOs as to how that NHS long-term plan is going to impact them and the opportunities that come from it. So certainly in terms of how we shift care outside of acute care to support reducing pressure in terms of acute, how we move it, and as to my next point, that decentralisation of care, so we move it into the community and ultimately empower our patients to receive care in a different way. And again, from a healthcare point of view, that the digital technology we wrap around it is critical to that decentralisation and how we can push flexibility into the models of care that we put in place. Next is kind of changing the shape of the NHS. So that decentralisation has happened for a reason. It's happened out of necessity, but it's also happened, I guess, out of policy too. STPs and sustainability and transformation plans and partnerships have been in place for a number of years now, but those moving now in terms of what accountable care will look like into integrated care systems and integrated care providers, and also from a community point of view in terms of primary care networks, means that the technology that we develop and we put in place and the support we can give you and the areas that you want to develop has to be able to fundamentally flex and be reactive. So it's not just a moment in time, but we're very well aware that over the upcoming years you're going to be under lots of challenges to move forward and to be able to make changes very quickly in terms of the care that you provide. And certainly hopefully you'll see today in terms of the stuff that Mike and Craig will talk about, some of that can be it will be in place now and is able to cope with those changes organisationally. Next one is changing patient demographics. 20 years ago when I was a kind of a junior member of a primary care trust in North London, we were always talking about those changing demographics. That's not changed, and certainly if anything inexorably it's got more and more of a change in terms of the fact that people clearly are living longer. The consequence of that being that they're living with more comorbidities. So therefore, the care that the NHS is provisioning is changing. It's changing from it just being, more acute focus to dealing with chronic disease management, dealing with comorbidities, and dealing with long-term care. And therefore, the demographics say that we need to provision IT that can support that change in care delivery. And clearly, again, the desktop estate is part of that process. Then moving on to NHS recruitment and retention. I think this has been made clearly much worse by COVID, but certainly, in my last role, 5 years at a large acute trust, we were challenged massively in terms of both recruitment and retention, and that was for many reasons, and I don't think we were any different. Conversations I have every day with CIOs and CTOs and heads of infrastructure, there are massive challenges, not just in terms of the clinical, but the non-clinical as well. But we have a belief that delivering technology that provides that flexibility for people to work remotely, for people to work across multiple sites, to allow them to flex the hours that they do, all of those things to deliver work-life balance will, number one, improve recruitment and create an environment for you where you can attract more people, you can attract more doctors and nurses to work for you. But number two, and it's a genuine risk, that people leave the NHS because of some of those challenges. So putting in place the right technology to deliver it will allow you to retain staff more as well. And the final area here is around security and business continuity. I'll leave Mike to talk a lot about the security piece from a technical point of view and from a kind of an IT operational point of view. But I just wanted to touch upon the business continuity piece. Again, COVID is a great example where understanding and driving and having very solid and robust business continuity plans is massively important. But certainly our experience of working with organisations out there is that those plans on their own mean very little if you haven't got the digital capabilities to deal with that. So we hope that some of the solutions that we'll talk about today prove that you can have that business continuity and that those two things can work hand in hand. Final kind of set of things from me before I pass over are some of the pieces, I guess, linked to a lot of those environmental pieces, but things that we feel are fundamentally important for the successful delivery of technology. Today, obviously, we're talking about desktop, but it could, you could look at this in any form at all. It's quite clear to us that successful delivery of technology is not just about the technology, which might sound like quite an obvious thing to say, but we see many projects fail out there within the NHS because those non-technical issues haven't been considered and they haven't been embraced. So we'll just go through a few of those now. First, in terms of strategic, so understanding and getting IT departments to work with their non-technical colleagues, to work with the execs and the clinicians in defining and understanding what the organisational strategy needs to be and understanding what the outcomes need to be, so that the technology roadmap that's put together absolutely aligns to that. And often that doesn't happen, as obvious as that sounds. So therefore, certainly the way that we like to work with our customers is to make sure that there's a real connection from the beginning on what the organisation is trying to deliver from a clinical and an operational point of view, so we can make sure that the technology is right. Second, in terms of culture, and I guess strongly these all link together, but from a cultural point of view, driving that engagement within the organisation. So supporting IT departments in the NHS to make sure that we're engaging with the executives, we're engaging with clinicians, and very importantly with patients, to make sure that the technology and the solutions that we define, both at a block level, but also at a trust level and a customer level, are actually crafted with people coming along the journey with us. And it's critical for a number of reasons. Number one, it means that the technology that we get is the right technology and it's more appropriate and aligned. But number two, actually in terms of gaining that engagement and gaining buy-in and making sure that the technology is sustained, it's far easier to do that when you get that cultural engagement from the beginning than leaving it to an afterthought. And then I guess linked into that process, so this isn't just about for us making sure that we put really clever, sexy technology in place. It's absolutely about understanding what the use cases are out there. And those are sometimes nuanced, but sometimes that nuance can be incredibly important. So making sure that we engage and making sure that we can support you guys in engaging with your organisations to make sure that the use cases are understood, that they're defined and that they're aligned to the technology. Again, absolutely critical. And that really leads on to the financial piece. And I've defined this here about financial, but it's more than that. So, we want to be able to support you guys in writing business cases so that you can get approval for technology, because without that you're not getting buy-in from your FD and your CIO, people like your Chief Operating Officer. So the finance piece is clearly important in terms of us defining what that return of investment is. But equally important in terms of that piece, it's about understanding the softer side of that. So, what are the clinical outcomes that are going to be improved from this? How are you enabling staff to work in a better way? How is the patient experience changing? And how do you articulate that in a way that, again, is a message that can go out to the organisation and get people bought in? Final couple of things, governance and assurance. I'd say in the 20 years I've worked in NHS IT on both sides of the fence, quite rightly, it's probably the thing that's led to more delays in delivery of technology than anything else. And I say quite rightly because that's not because of people have being working in a way that's trying to block things. But the point we're trying to make here is that working with governance in terms of whether that be clinical governance or information governance, hand in hand to make sure they understand what the challenges are. Cloud is a very good example there where people are concerned they don't necessarily understand it. And we believe there's a real role for us to play to support you guys in making sure that we can educate, inform and engage with those governance and assurance colleagues to make sure that the right pieces are put in place, to make sure that the technology can be delivered within an appropriate timeline. And then the final one there around partnerships, you'll all be very well aware, sorry, that you don't work in isolation anymore. 20 years ago, certainly when I was working for Enfield PCT, we were fairly siloed, and that world has changed. It's changed because of things like primary care networks, integrated care systems coming in, what's happened over the last couple of years as I talk about with STPs, but constantly the message and the way that staff are having to work to treat patients quite positively is changing. It becomes longitudinal. So patients' experience across care settings needs to be joined up. And again, we believe there's a story to be told to allow people to connect, to make sure that the technology connects across organisations, whether that be across different care settings or whether that be in partnership across, let's say, two acute trusts. But there's lots and lots of positive things there to look at economies of scale, to look at better ways of working from a technical point of view, that again, we think should factor into the development and delivery of technology. Okay, next slide, please, Mark. So final piece from me, which I'll touch upon very briefly. So we all of those bits we've talked about there, over the last sort of 18 months, we've been developing our Block Transform consulting service. That's not just about us, selling services at all. It's about engaging with you guys in different areas. And again, I won't go through this today necessarily, but it's about understanding the non-technical pieces as well as the technical to make sure that when you deliver technology, you're supported in delivering it outside of just your direct IT department, within your finance department, your procurement department. So if those are areas of challenge that you have that you'd like to talk to us about, we'd love to talk to you and understand how we can possibly support you moving forward. I'll hand over now to Mike. He'll start looking at more of the his experience from a technical operational point of view as a desktop manager. So over to you, Mike.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to try and take this 15-minute window I've got today really just to provide a bit of an overview of my experiences as managing two desktop environments within the NHS. So I joined Block around about 6 months ago during the height of COVID, but before that I worked in NHS for around about 7 years, primarily at Salford Royal NHS Foundation Trust, but also at Wythenshawe Hospital as well, both as desktop architect and as desktop services manager. So I kind of got that double-edged sword benefit of being able to look at the technical aspects and the non-technical side. When I came up with some of the content for the slides today, it was quite reassuring that some of the challenges I've experienced at one trust were quite prevalent in the other, which is also a slight disappointment. And I suppose that just kind of goes to show that the desktop challenges that I would face are probably going to be faced by the majority of desktop managers across the NHS, and probably stretching into the network teams and the infrastructure teams as well. Some of these challenges are not just siloed to the desktop teams. With that being said, with the challenges, I've kind of tried to break them down into 4 main pillars: security, compliance, device management, resources and strategy. I've put security and compliance first, not because it's the most important, but mainly because it's probably the one that's had the biggest spotlight on it in the past 2 years or so, and I think we can thank WannaCry for that. Before WannaCry, I think everybody's, or certainly from my experience, most people's idea of cybersecurity was you did your Windows updates, you deployed an antivirus, you had some form of DLP in place to protect USB devices, and you encrypted your devices, and you kind of 9 times out of 10 that would secure you against most common threats, the odd malware outbreak. You had your semi kind of efficient processes in place to deal with that. I think WannaCry came along and blew that out of the water, and it kind of put everybody under the spotlight. That even the most, mundane things like doing Windows updates patches were not being completed. Had the processes been in place and been done correctly, WannaCry probably would not have been as severe as it was. On the back of that, there are now a much more emphasis on the reporting and the compliance side of the desktop estate. So it's not just about saying you update your physical workstations or your laptops anymore. You know how to provide that security and that compliance, as well as the evidence. And that evidence can be in various forms, whether it's in Power BI or whether it's in reporting dashboards and other methods. And also what is suitable for me isn't always suitable for the director of IT or the head of IT or the CIO. So you then find yourself having to tailor to those personas, tailoring certain dashboards for certain people. On the back of the security and compliance side of it is the DSP toolkit. It's something that I had a love and hate affair with at the end of every year. Really, it gets harder every year to complete. It's a massive drain on resource to complete that toolkit and to provide the evidence for the assertions. I think there are around about 50 to 60 assertions that relate to the desktop estate as well as applications. Once it gets to that time of year, it can be a struggle to find that evidence if you've not operationalised it. So if you don't know where your certain dashboards are to provide evidence for 4.7.2 off the top of my head, you've then got to go away and find it. And ultimately, as a desktop manager, it probably falls on my shoulders to do that, because I would rather the staff who work for me be going on with the project works and the day-to-day work. So not only does it take a drain on me, but also the wider technical teams as well. Add to that things like the care certs, which are now more prevalent, especially the 14-day high severity ones. There is an expectation for NHS Digital that trust will be 100% compliant by that 14-day window. I think we can all agree. And in the month of Sundays, you're never going to get to that, mainly because you working in a slightly large NHS organisation, even the very large ones, not every single device is online at any one point during that 14-day window. So there's always going to be a non-compliant device somewhere. And that kind of leads on to the Windows updates aspect of it as well. They've always been there, they will continue to be there. They are more manageable than they used to be. But as we can see with WannaCry, all it takes is somebody to not be following the right process, and it can lead to a severe security threat. So they've got now more prevalent, especially within the things like the Cyber Essentials certification. And even if you are looking at Cyber Essentials, the yearly penetration tests that come along, yes, they are fantastic because it gives you an opportunity to see where the gaps are in your infrastructure. But if you don't get that resource at the end of the year, or even the budget to fix those resources, ultimately, why are you doing the penetration test? Because you'll take them the year after and you'll still fail again. So this is the constant thing of, yes, security is a massive thing with NHS at the moment, but it needs that budget and it needs that resource behind it to make it what it should be. Moving on to device management, obviously the most important thing for a desktop manager. Probably the most important project ongoing at this moment in time is Windows 7 to Windows 10. So for any trust that went very early and are just about to finish their, or have already finished their migration, congratulations. You are now looking at the evergreen cycle. So the good work that you've done now has to start again. With Windows 10 being evergreen, it's no longer that traditional XP or Windows 7 environment that you could deploy, leave it for 5 years and come back to it. It's constantly changing, it's constantly evolving. And with that, the technical limitations within the teams and also the resourcing gaps also have to change as well. You have to change at pace with the operating system. It's no longer just a case of deploying some policies and leaving them be. It's constantly changing. For organisations that are just about to finish their Windows 10 migration, again, the hard work doesn't stop, it just starts again. So all the application readiness, all the hardware decisions you're going to have to make, you have to make that cycle again, whether you choose to do it over every 12 months or every 18 months. There is an understanding from NHS Digital that organisations will try to keep up to date as humanly possible. Whether or not you could do once every 6 months, again, it depends on the size of the organisation. What makes that even more difficult at this moment in time is increased home working. I think it was something that was on the cards for most NHS organisations. I think COVID has obviously expedited some of that in some instances. Where organisations are now going to struggle, going back to the security aspects of it, is if you've got devices that are not on the corporate network and you don't have that traditional VPN in place or a VDI infrastructure in place that you could retrofit to give you increased home working, your compliance ratings are going to start to go down, and it becomes harder and harder to hit those high 90s for your Windows Update compliance especially. Adding to the fact that there are numerous management consoles for us to work in day in, day out, for me, I'd probably use at least 9 or 10 different consoles on a day-to-day basis. And that would just be for simple things like doing daily checks, running reports, making modifications, adding in new pieces of technology, for example. The reason we have those management consoles is because of poor investment decisions in the past. The right salesperson came in and spoke to the wrong technical manager, and all of a sudden you've got an MDM platform that is only used for 300 devices, but you've got another 2,000 that's sat in another one. And this is something that I experienced at Salford. We had licenses for 4 different MDM platforms in the end, all with their own set purpose. So every time you have to run a report or you provide evidence for DSPT, for example, you're just doing that repetitive nature of having to go to each console to run the same report 4 times to give you the evidence that you need. Ideally, there should be some consolidation work to go on in there. And in the end of it, probably shadow IT, which is something that I kind of struggled with, particularly at Salford Royal. I'm going to say shadow IT, probably more aligned to the medical physics, the PACS teams, as they do have their own technical teams in place that look after their hardware. Many moons ago, that was okay, you could really have gotten away with it. But as more clinical vendors such as Welch Allyn, GE and Philips now using Windows 10 and Windows 10 IoT especially for their operating systems for their medical devices, these devices now sit on the network. Whether they're connected to the domain or not is irrelevant. They've got an IP address. So if you do have security management infrastructure in place that's monitoring these devices, it's now an asset that needs to be managed. So you're having to come up with new ways of having to put some security on that device, but also give you that compliance and reporting. The security and the device management feeds into the resources. You can only do both of those pillars. If you've got the right number of people, I think you ask any technical manager in the NHS, they'll all agree they're overworked and under-resourced, and that's because it's been chronically underfunded over the years, especially when you consider what it takes to run a similar sized desktop in a private environment. You're probably talking twice the amount of staff, and you would have probably a dedicated security team who would just look after the governance and compliance of that desktop estate, leaving the other parts of the desktop team to do the management aspects of it. There are too many projects on the go, whether that's from a technical or from a clinical standpoint, and I think the reason for that is because there's a struggle to deploy. So projects overrun, they're underfunded, and also it's about getting sometimes even the right project managers involved from the PMO. The rate of change is obviously something that's been quite, in my opinion, quite static. You could probably guess you're probably going to do 1 EPR upgrade every year, if you've got an EPR platform. PACS upgrades probably every 18 months. Obviously now you've got your Windows 10 cycle. That will all now change, I think, with COVID. I think there'll be lots of new technology on the horizon that organisations will be looking to, which will expand the reach of their footprint past their perimeter, whether you're looking at remote locations or increased home working. And then it all kind of really goes into the strategy side of it. So for me, past experience within Shaw as well as Salford there was a bit of a disconnect between the technical teams and the clinical teams as to what the digital strategy would be. And when I say digital strategy, that's kind of defining the infrastructure, but also the technologies that are going to be in place. I think there's a misconception and a lack of understanding from the clinical teams, especially as to if they go out and procure a new system, what effect that has on the technical teams. It's not just a simple case of deploying an application or deploying a server. There are a myriad of number of changes that need to go underneath that, including do we actually have the data center capacity to run some of these systems? And I think that's that lack of clinical engagement. I think for me, from my point of view, I try to be as engaged with the CCIOs, especially at Salford, just to try and get an understanding of where their thinking was, some of the reports and feedback from their clinical teams as to where the clinical technology is going to be going in the next 12, 18 months. I think that's the only way you can line up the desktop estate and make it something that's viable for all users to use going forward. And I suppose that then drives into the standardisation part of it, and that's not just standardisation from a technical standpoint, but it's standardisation in workflow. So when you do get these requests in from the clinical teams, they follow a set procedure, a set standardised set of reports, so you can gather all the requirements, you can gather what the outcomes are going to be, so it gives you the best opportunity to deliver a successful project. Where we then tried to take that step further was to put standardisations in for clinical vendors and suppliers as well. So rather than ourselves chasing our tails to try and make something work, we put the onus on the vendors and the actual suppliers to give us something that met our standards. So it would be particular standard of Windows 10, hardware version, a TPM for encryption, for example. If you can put that in place, at the end of the day, it just makes your life a hell of a lot easier in the end. But it's not, like I said, I wanted to not make today all about the negatives. There are some positives, and I guess the main ones really have been the new national agreements. The Windows 10 one especially brought Windows 10, E5 and Defender ATP. So Defender ATP finally gives NHS organisations the ability to having a holistic view of their desktop estate to try and prevent another WannaCry. And the Windows 10 agreement obviously gave organisations that leg up from the Windows 7 licensing agreement from 5-6 years ago to finally give them some Windows 10 licenses. N365 came along about 6 months ago. In my personal opinion, it should have come at the same time as Windows 10 back in 2018, as there's no point having an operating system if you can't deploy it. So with N365, it does give you Intune and Config Manager, so it allows you to still use that traditional way of deploying devices, but also start to look at the more co-management and modern management ways of internet-connected devices as well. Azure AD P1 and P2 finally gives organisations the ability to put some proper security authentication on their users. So multi-factor authentication and single sign-on and risk-based analysis. I will start, in my personal opinion, it wouldn't surprise me to see some of those being added into DSPT assertions now that NHS organisations are licensed for those kind of technologies. And Office 365 finally gives NHS a route away from the Office 2010 licenses that were around from 10 years ago, which I know people have been clinging on to with dear hope. And that all stretches into the greater cloud adoption piece. So as Dan mentioned previously, the IG side of it, I think it was cloud was a bit of a dirty word, not just because it was something they didn't want to do. I think it was just a lack of understanding and a lack of where the risks were. Some of that is now changed with new UK data centres especially. And as long as you've risk assessed your data and you've itemised it and you know where that data is going to be held, there's now nothing stopping you from taking data from your on-premise infrastructure and putting it into SharePoint on OneDrive, for example. And all this is built on the back of UK government's cloud first now proposal rather than the cloud where appropriate. It also allows you to remove some of your traditional infrastructure, but also move away from that infrastructure should you have data center capacity issues, or even if you're going through that transitional phase of looking to do a transformation project from an infrastructure standpoint. Gives you that any place, any device type of mentality, but also allows you to scale up and down at pace, and also bring in some levels of automation which can take away some of that remedial pieces of work. And then for me, probably the last piece is the virtual desktop side of it. So traditionally, it's always been Citrix and VMware centric. Microsoft have now brought out their new VDI deployment, Windows Virtual Desktop, which was a part of the Windows 10 E5 licensing agreement as well. And with that, it now gives you that ability to stretch out your existing VDI infrastructures if you have Citrix or VMware into the cloud. You know, they both have full hybrid models, but it also allows you to use VDI as a potential disaster recovery in the cloud, but also an expansion as well. So rather than going out and reinvesting in your typical infrastructure, you now have the opportunity to only procure and buy the capacity that you need. And as I mentioned, it's not just Citrix. Remember, Microsoft are now part of that game. They're now actively working with Citrix on a collaborative effort for Windows Virtual Desktop. And because of this, you know, supported hybrid models and full cloud models and migration paths, it's now a competitive market where it's probably 24 months ago, it probably wasn't as such. And all that competitiveness is just going to drive innovation and push it forward, which hopefully will drive some prices down and maybe give VDI as an option for some trusts who have maybe found it cost prohibitive. So like I say, it was just really to give an overview of some of the challenges that I face in NHS. It's a really down condensed version. I could have sat here and waffled on for 9 hours. Nobody wants to hear that, but if you do, by all means reach out. And really it's just to give you an overview of what has changed as well. So it's not all negative. There are some positives out there, especially with the new licensing agreements and looking at cloud as an option. And with that being said, I'll pass over to Craig, who's got a bit more information.
Okay, yeah, thanks Mike. So good morning everybody. I'm Craig Pickford, I'm Solutions Architect from Block. And this morning I'm going to talk to you about how you can leverage some of the entitlements from your N365 agreement to help deliver a better workspace for your end users. So the N365 agreements really given the NHS access to Microsoft's cloud-based technologies that can really help to change and transform the way that devices, applications and your data can be delivered and secured across the organisation now. There's two main areas I'm going to focus on for my session today. The first one being the sort of Microsoft Endpoint Manager, which is Microsoft Endpoint Manager combines Microsoft Intune with System Center Configuration Manager. So I know a lot of people across the NHS are using System Center today and have been for a number of years to sort of deploy and manage applications and the operating system to all their devices. But with Intune now, as part of this agreement, you get Microsoft are really sort of trying to drive you towards this cloud-based platform for device management. So Intune's 100% cloud-based, and Microsoft are using this to help you drive towards this the modern management approach. So modern management being this concept of having the ability to manage your entire fleet of devices wherever they are. So it could be that you're able to now, with modern management, push applications, push configurations and new policies and changes across the environment to devices, whether they're physically connected on premise, if they're used out in the community, or even from people's homes, or a combination of all those different places. And with modern management, when you compare it to some of the traditional ways of managing operating systems and applications, it's a lot more lightweight. So rather than having this sort of big hefty image that you'd sort of load all your drivers into, and then you load all your applications into, and then you try and push that out across all your devices. With modern management, Microsoft are pushing more towards managing devices, or managing Windows 10 more like a mobile device. You can take a Windows 10 device out of the box, and you can start to push your own policies and configurations and really mold it to your corporate policy without using this big heavyweight image. And yeah, by leveraging some of these tools with modern management, you can really start to transform the way and streamline the way that devices can be deployed. And although these types of scenarios aren't for everybody, we can really transform from sort of typical PC refresh, where you might have 100 or 1,000 PCs as part of that refresh program, which would typically get ordered, get shipped into the IT department, and they'd all get this hefty image installed on with the applications and the different drivers, and you'd have to sort of find the drivers for the new models if there's a model change there, and they typically get put on a trolley and then sort of swapped out with across the organisation. With modern management now, we can use something called autopilot, which enables you in the sort of most extreme sense to send a device straight out to a user's home or to a remote location, where the user can unbox the device themselves, and when the user logs on for the first time, it identifies that that device belongs to our service, and it will start to push the policies and the applications specific to that user and specific to your organisation without the user doing anything, without IT department doing anything. So while that's quite an extreme case and it's not going to be fit for every sort of scenario, the IT team can start to adopt some of these processes as well as part of that modern management programme to help deliver and streamline some of the services that they're offering to their end users. But yeah, of course, that's not going to be sort of day one for everyone. Microsoft acknowledge that, and Block acknowledge that, and where you can get the best of both worlds really is through the concept of co-management. So with co-management, we can use Intune to manage new devices and mobile devices and laptops, but we can also sort of lean back on System Center and Configuration Manager and some of these more traditional processes for what you're doing now. And then over time can start to transition and migrate some of the old ways of working into the new ways of working to try and get some of those efficiencies and some of those benefits across the environment. So yeah, the second thing, and Mike's mentioned this already, the Windows Virtual Desktop. So this is quite a relatively new technology. It's Microsoft's cloud-based virtual desktop platform that runs on Azure. And with your Windows 10 E5 licenses, you get an entitlement to use Windows Virtual Desktop. So this gives you a license in effect. It doesn't sort of give you, it doesn't support the costs of running those virtual desktop workloads in the cloud. But yeah, Mike also mentioned a lot of people are already using Citrix or VMware-based virtual desktop solutions on-premise, which have over the years delivered tremendous amounts of benefits and value for NHS organisations, specifically in these fast-moving areas, giving clinicians that speed of access to clinical information, clinical systems at the point of care, but also a lot of benefits as well, as we've seen ever more so during COVID. Using virtual desktop technology to deliver remote access during COVID and during other sorts of disasters to support business continuity, where in effect you can allow users to go home, use their home devices and connect to a virtual desktop that contains all the systems and the applications that they need to continue working and to continue delivering clinical and operational services to patients and to users. Yeah, with Windows Virtual Desktop, with on-premise virtual desktop solutions historically, there's also been some challenges other than the benefits. So some of the challenges relate to the costs involved in standing up the infrastructure and supporting the compute and the storage capacities from these high-end virtual desktops to support healthcare. And also over time, as things have changed, as new applications get released as the operating systems change from Windows 7 to Windows 10. This has all had an effect on the capacity of Windows Virtual Desktop as well, which has meant a lot of organisations now have either running under capacity or have actually had to purchase more hardware to support the influx of support those changes or influx of users due to COVID. So yeah, with Windows Virtual Desktop, we can really take the best of both worlds there. We can continue to deliver out some of the benefits that virtual desktop technology can bring within a healthcare environment, but we can also mitigate against some of the risks with this hardware. With it being cloud-based technology, we only provision the amount of resources that we need. We don't have to over-provision for disaster recovery. If we need 100 desktops this week, we provision 100 desktops, but if we still have a rise in users, we can increase the number of desktops and scale out to meet the demands there. So there's some of the benefits in terms of Windows Virtual Desktop. I guess the other thing which is probably more relevant to the NHS now than most other organisations is with Windows Virtual Desktop, Microsoft have extended the support for Windows 7 to 2022. So that might fit some use cases where you might have certain certain departments that use certain applications that are still reliant on Windows 7, and you don't want to sort of run in a unsecure way with it being on premise. You could move those into Windows Virtual Desktop and run those applications on Windows Virtual Desktop with Windows 7 for an extra 2 years. So it might give you a bit of breathing space. So that's another option there. Okay, next slide. So yeah, Block have developed two propositions around these different types of technology that I'm talking about right now. So the first one is Mobile Clinical Workspace. This is our VDI solution designed for healthcare, which runs on Windows Virtual Desktop. And this is really aimed at those frontline workers, these clinicians that require fast access to information at the point of care that would typically use shared clinical workstations, so computers on wheels or WOWs, where a user can now approach any workstation and quickly log in and get access to the information in the clinical systems that they need. They can share those workstations quite easily as well. So within a ward environment where you have a bunch of nurses, they're able to quickly switch over each other's sessions and get access to information. Each time a clinician moves across different devices, the virtual desktop will follow them. And rather than sort of spending several minutes waiting for a log on at each workstation as clinicians move around, as the desktop follows them, it takes just a couple of seconds then to bring up that virtual desktop and get access to the systems. So as part of our Mobile Clinical Workspace, it can be deployed in a number of different ways. The version that you see in front of you now is our shared tenant, which provides access to HSCN-enabled services as well as part of the service. It includes malware protection and secure web filtering. And as part of the services that Block provide, we also include the delivery, the packaging, and the ongoing maintenance and delivery of those clinical applications as well. So the clinical applications that you use within your organisation, we'd be able to package those up, and any updates and changes that occur over time, then we facilitate that for you as well. Another great use case for Mobile Clinical Workspace and Windows Virtual Desktop is providing that secure remote access. So we all know COVID and now that's hit people, and I really do think that people that had these on-premise virtual desktop solutions or adopted cloud-based virtual desktop solutions during COVID were able to respond to COVID quite quickly, provided with much greater levels of success than those that were still using laptops and other types of solutions. Like I said, the ability to give someone to send someone home and tell them to use their home device to access their virtual desktops, their clinical systems over the internet securely. Some of the features that we've bundled into our Mobile Clinical Workspace include multi-factor authentication and also conditional access. So with conditional access, we can allow or deny or filter some of the applications and services that people can access depending on the context, so depending on their location. So if they're working from home, we could in effect prevent them from accessing certain clinical systems or certain types of data as well. Okay, next slide please. And then our second proposition, which is built on the Intune and Configuration Manager side of what I spoke about earlier, is our managed service designed around Windows 10, so the delivery and management of Windows 10 for an NHS organisation. And there's several parts to this service that we can deliver. But first of all, if you're behind on the migration to Windows 10, we can provide the project management and the resources to help you complete that migration. But we also provide a range of services around the compliance, security, and the management, the ongoing management of that Windows 10 estate. All the stuff that Mike mentioned before, it can be a massive drain on an IT team. In terms of the compliance, we not only do the Windows 10 evergreen management, so this monthly patch cycle, we also commit to doing a Windows 10 feature release. So these are the versions of Windows 10 that get released every 6 months. So every year we'll deliver a Windows 10 feature release to all your Windows 10 devices. And also as part of the service, as new care certs get released from NHS Digital, we'll identify across the environment where those care certs are relevant, which applications or devices they're applicable to, and then we'll take on the deployment of those care certs within the required timescales as well. Another sort of essential service that we provide as part of this is around the DSPT requirements as well. So out of the 170 plus requirements of Data Security and Protection Toolkit, I think there's around 50 or 60 that relate to desktops and applications and devices. So as part of this service, Block will ensure that all your devices are secure and compliant with DSPT. And we also provide the monitoring and the dashboards as well to not only say that we're doing that, but then to prove it as well. Any changes that you need across your environment in terms of when your applications get released or new policies or configurations are needed, then we'll take that on as well, and then we'll manage that process through across all your devices and provide you back reporting on how we're delivering that service to you. And in terms of the Windows 10, as an alternative to VDI for certain types of use cases, we're also able to provide this a scenario for always on VPN, which could be used to then connect you outside of Office 365 applications, but to get you access to other key applications within your organisation too. As part of the user side of this service, then we provide multi-factor authentication, and we can provide conditional access based on what a user might need to access in certain scenarios as well as some of the identity protection features from the national agreement. So things like detecting where users are signing in from, and providing automated controls around that. Okay. And then just to recap, so just using how you can use these technologies really. The technologies as part of the agreement or the services that Block are able to deliver to really take your desktop estate and start to transform how we are delivering services, delivering applications and securing data as well. So taking all the DSPT requirements, cyber essentials and care certs as they get released, managing this Windows 10 evergreen for you, and supporting some of these flexible work styles. So COVID has obviously seen an influx of remote working. I think that's probably here to stay. I think it's going to grow, if anything. I think more and more people and more businesses have realised, well, actually, we can now see how effective my teams can be when they work remotely, and if anything, it's probably brought them together. But over time, I think it's going to be ever more important that we get a handle on understanding, and we provide the right tools and processes to understand how people could start to work differently, understand how applications and services are performing, understanding where the requirements might change over time, and then as Block are managing all the change throughout these different propositions, then mapping some of the changes that occur over time, overlaying that with some of the performance trends as well to identify what's had an impact on that, so we can identify any risks that may be occurring and then nip them in the bud as quickly as possible. And as part of all these services, I think providing information across the compliance, across the security, across the user experience in terms of dashboards that can be based on personas, so based on desktop manager like Mike in his previous role, based on security managers or IT directors or CIO, providing the right level of information for the devices, the data, the security and the users to the right person at the right time. So that's all from me. I'm going to hand it back over to Dan now.
Lovely. Cheers, guys. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, guys, for listening. We've got a question coming and a couple of others that I was sent before, which I'll come on to. So I'd encourage you, if you do have any other questions, quickly pop them into the question panel. One of the things that I didn't mention at the beginning is there's an opportunity, if you're interested, for us to run pilots with you on this. Be relatively brief, sort of 2-week pilots, but we can engage with you to understand, as Craig talked about a lot there, the use case and how they, how you would want to leverage this type of technology, of which there's a number of different kind of variables there that could be done. So if you are interested in that, please do reach out to us and we can be in contact and sort that out fairly quickly. In terms of questions, I've got one here from John, so thank you for that. Guys, probably you, Craig, to answer this. Does the Windows 7 on virtual desktop include security updates and patching?
Yeah, from Microsoft, yeah. So we could manage that as part of the service, but if you went alone, then yeah, if you had a virtual desktop running on Windows 7 virtual desktop on, and you get the updates from Microsoft. So yes.
Wonderful. And a couple of others. What were the lessons learned from migrating to Windows 10?
I'd probably say echoes what Craig mentioned earlier. So I think from my own personal point of view, when we did the projects at Salford, I think some of the early design decisions we made with the Windows 10 image basically came back to bite us later on in the project. So something as simple as removing the Microsoft Store has a massive knock-on effect to everything else that you want to do, especially if you start to look at the more modern ways of managing Windows 10. And I think the reasons we made those design decisions is because we treated it like a Windows 7 project, because that's what we were used to, even going back to the Windows XP days. So I think the design decisions, but also for me, Windows 10 is a completely separate operating system to Windows 7. I think some people have made the wrong assumptions that it can just be managed in a traditional way. I think you have to move with the times and embrace that co-management and modern management step that Craig touched on earlier.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Next question, probably one for you again, Mike. Is VDI the best way to manage desktop at large scale?
I think it certainly has its place. I think from our standpoint, from Salford, we were traditionally physical endpoints across the board. There was a project put in place to finally move away from that for the clinical side, and that's where, in my personal opinion, VDI has its most positive impact, especially in an NHS organisation. It delivers that fast instant access, but also delivers that standard and optimised image repetitively across the board, rather than having that kind of mismatch of hardware, mismatch of applications. VDI is not going to fit every use case. There's always going to be an application out there that doesn't work in a virtual environment, and that's where your physical controls, whether you utilise things like SCCM or Intune, come in. But yeah, I think for me, VDI certainly in this day and age, with the licenses that are out there and the technology that's out there, certainly has a massive part to play in managing a desktop at scale, effectively.
Yeah, I think some of the things we didn't cover in the slides per se around the IT benefits and the operational benefits of VDI over a traditional approach. With VDI, you've got that one gold image that you update, and then that gets cloned and then pushed out to all the users. And you can be confident that if a user connects to a virtual desktop, that they've got the latest version, they've got the latest security releases, they've got the latest applications that you've put on. I think when you've got a dispersed estate that can be thousands of devices, you can never be 100% sure that every single device has got the latest version of the applications and the latest patches, and I think that's one of the biggest key things. I think as new applications get introduced into the environment as well, you run into the same problems. Pushing an application out to multiple sites. I mean, some of our customers have got 150 plus sites, so pushing out the same applications to all these devices across all these sites, and now with people working remotely as well. When you compare that to VDI, you update it once and then you clone that out. So yeah, massive difference, massive efficiency gains there.
Great, thanks guys. Couple more questions come in. This one probably for you, Craig, I'd imagine. How does your Windows 10 service work with a shared tenant?
So it can work in different ways. So yes, so the Windows 10 service, our mobile clinical workspace. Oh, sorry, is it the Windows 10 management service? So Windows 10 management. The challenge we've got with the shared service at the moment is, I guess, a lack of visibility into the roadmap, and I think this is common across all NHS customers at the moment. It's not currently supported or being deployed by NHS Digital and the service provider there. So we will have to wait to see. We're at the sort of the mercy of the service provider. I think it's going to be a challenge for anything in that shared service to deliver the same amount of value as it will for an individual tenant. So with an individual tenant, you've absolutely got full reign of your tenant, and you can do whatever you want. And I think even if this shared tenant does start to allow organisations to start to control their own application deployment and policy creation and push that out to their own devices. There's still limitations naturally within Microsoft Intune that prevent things like data leaving it out. So if you wanted to create your own dashboards, for example, I can see there being challenges there because the data is contained within that shared tenant, and I just don't know how they're going to split it. Some of the information we've actually had back from Microsoft directly around the shared tenant is that of all the organisations, around 65% of organisations went for down the shared tenant route, and already up to 60% of those that have adopted to the shared tenant have expressed an interest in coming out. Because it just seems that everything that you try and turn to and that you try and want to deliver from the shared tenant, you quickly hit a brick wall, really, and it quickly becomes a bit more complex. So, yeah, obviously it was a cheaper option, but I think there's losing a lot of value and a lot of control in what you can deliver and make a change.
Great. Thank you, Craig. A couple more. One point, John, just to acknowledge. Yeah, we'll certainly be in contact with you, John, in terms of the DSPT. That's no problem at all. And then a follow-up question from you as well. Our laptops have increased massively over the last 5 years. How do you see VDI working on laptops?
It all comes down to use case again. I think there's nothing stopping you running a virtual desktop from a full-blown Windows 10 device. It has a dual purpose then. You know, it can be used for remote access into the VDI environment for specific clinical services. You don't have to necessarily deploy a full-blown VDI image. You could do virtualized applications instead. You know, they are native across VMware, Citrix and Microsoft. So, you know, you can give that traditional VDI type environment, but have it as a seamless window within your physical endpoint. Then again, if you're at a crossroads with your hardware, you could start to look at things like Chromebooks, you know, things like iGels, to basically replace your traditional Windows 10 laptops, reduce the security footprint of them, and kind of deploy a mobile thin client as such. It still provides that instant access. Again, from remote access wise, you're still at the mercy of a 4G or a 5G connection if you've not got wireless at a certain point. But then that would be the same for whichever service you're likely to take if you had a VPN on the physical endpoint.
Great.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sorry, Dan, that's a good point, Mike, around delivering applications rather than full-blown desktop, particularly where you've got users now that might use, maybe corporate users where they've got a need to use Office 365 applications, but also to use HSCN served applications as well, or a small number of those. So rather than establishing a full VPN connection and then getting over HSCN, you can use the platform, and particularly our shared platform, to then just broker access to HSCN for those applications as well. And it just puts an icon on the desktop. It's actually running a virtual desktop in our platform, but it's just an icon on the desktop to the user. They just think that they're logging onto something locally. It's probably got performance benefits as well, security benefits in delivering it in that way as well.
Great, that's great. Thank you, guys. Good timing. We're sort of 5 minutes left. If there's any further questions, please pop them in now. If not, thanks, Craig. Thanks, Mike, for your comments and your input. For those of you on the call, many thanks for joining. As I mentioned, there's an opportunity for us to run pilots with this, so please do reach out if you're interested in that. If there's any follow-up questions, again, please do reach out. I'll be more than happy to chat. But if not, that's all from us. So thanks very much and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.